Here on Soccer North from The Athletic, Joshua Kloke, who just spent 3.5 weeks in Qatar covering the World Cup, and in particular, covering the Canadian men. Welcome to the show, Josh. You wrote a great post-mortem piece in The Athletic, so we're going to get into that both on and off the pitch. Let's begin on the pitch in particular. Do you feel John Herdman needs to be ruthless moving forward with player personnel in order to have a different story come 2026?
Definitely. And I think John Herdman did really well throughout qualifying to be loyal to the people that helped get Canada, not just to the World Cup through this last qualifying cycle, but had been with the men's program for so long. But ultimately, I think the spine of this team really needs to change. And there's three players in particular that I think, A, have done an incredible service to the Canadian men's national team, but B, and two things can be true here, might need to move on in favor of some younger, fresher faces. Atiba Hutchinson is still arguably the best, men's player in Canadian history. But I think against Croatia, his lack of foot speed was exposed. And I think it's probably time to turn over the keys in the midfield to Ismail Kone. I think Steve Vittoria, at his age as well, again, we're talking about players over 30. We're in a world in modern football where center backs have to be fast on the ball. And he got exposed a few times for a lack of foot speed. And then moving even further back, Milan Borjan, I think we all saw the blunder against Morocco. And it's not because of that blunder alone, but I see two great younger goalkeepers, Dane Sinclair in particular and Mac Crepeau, who are more than capable, I think, of starting right now. And I just think if you want to compete in 2026, you have to be all in on speed, because that's the way the game is trending. So that's why I think the spine of this team really needs to change.
What were the comments around John Herdman? He was entering as one of these coaches with a reputation of being tactically sound. But I'm curious to know what people were saying about John Herdman in particular as a manager.
Well, again, and I know we've already brought it up, I think the comments after Croatia are something that John certainly wishes he hadn't said. And I think if you talk to some experienced journalists, which I did, they all felt that that's something that doesn't need to be said. You don't need to give a team like Croatia any extra ammunition. This is a team that already felt like underdogs. You remember at the last World Cup when they were up against England, who were claiming it was coming home. Sometimes I wonder if this Canadian team was a little bit too focused on what they had to do and a little less focused on how other teams would attack them, right? They came out against Belgium and they dominated play. They dictated play. It was very surprising and borderline concerning to me that Canada would roll out a two-man midfield against Croatia, who have one of the best three-man midfields in global and international soccer right now. So that's, the perception of this Canadian team, I will say, wildly changed over the span of a week. They were darlings coming into the tournament. They were darlings after Belgium. And the rug got pulled out from this team, very, very quickly.
Let's go off the pitch now, and I don't need to tell you the stories because you were over there living them, from, Canada being late to their first press conference to journalists being upset of the lack of player availability, in particular, the superstar in Alphonso Davies. What was that experience like for you? We know Canada Soccer has been to the Olympics with the women. They've been to the World Cup with the women. How did they do on the men's side?
On one hand, I understand it, right? The comparison I made is it felt to me like Canada Soccer was showing up to their first day at work and their first job out of university, right? You have all the right intentions, but you get there and you realize this is a completely different beast. I had the opportunity to go to training sessions. I went to a Japanese training session and 12 players were made available to the media after through mix zones. And with Canada Soccer, you would get maybe two players. The media had very little input on which players were made available. Sometimes it was players that hadn't played in the tournament yet. And it didn't feel like Canada Soccer was as interested in, I guess, helping us tell stories, because the stories within this national team are vast. There's players that come from incredibly different backgrounds, players that come from difficult backgrounds. And we wanted to tell those stories, but it felt like, access was limited. And it just felt like there's a lot to learn from some clearly world-class football organizations. I mentioned Japan, the United States, which we should be comparing ourselves to as a quote unquote Soccer Nation a lot. The organization they showed in making players available before the tournament, we wanted to help tell stories. And it felt like that interest in telling stories wasn't necessarily reciprocal, if that makes sense.
I understand you, because here at CBC, we have this saying, come the Olympics, we don't want you meeting an athlete for the first time when they're on the podium. We want you to know their story in the 4 years in between, because it is about storytelling. It's about bridging that gap, and it's about creating that connection with fans who may not know who these athletes are to begin with. They just tune in once every 4 years to the World Cup. But now, throughout the years, throughout the cycle, they will get to know them. So I get that. I get everything you're saying. I loved your article. Welcome back home, and really appreciate you taking the time here on Soccer North.
Thanks so much, Andy.